Okay, young historians, now that we've read the entire Constitution, it's time to get on with the Bill of Rights. Of course, we understand all about the Bill of Rights already because of our understanding of ratification, but now we're going to dig into these first 10 amendments to the Constitution. These 10 amendments are essential to protecting our rights as American citizens, and they do apply to a lot of what goes on with us day to day. Of course, you know that the Bill of Rights were written in 1789 after the ratification of the Constitution as part of that final compromise between the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists. It consists of those 10 amendments, and we're going to dig into just Amendment 1. Over here it says Article 1, but it's just Amendment 1 for our first look at the Bill of Rights. This is the handout that you're getting for the introduction to the Bill of Rights, and it also gives you an overview of what you're going to do to be prepared for class on either Wednesday or Thursday. It's all written right here, 1 through 7. See that? First thing I want you to do is read the story of the Bill of Rights. It should take you about 4 minutes, and it will give you an idea of exactly how the Bill of Rights were created. You know why they were created, but how they were created, thank you, George Mason and James Madison. Just kind of give you that little historical backstory there. From there, you're going to take some notes. You've got this little video here and this handout about the First Amendment. We're only looking at the First Amendment today or tonight for our next class on Wednesday or Thursday. And if you take a look at it, you've got your target right here that you can identify and apply the protections and limits of the Bill of Rights to actual situations. That's the cool part about the Bill of Rights, is because we can make them sort of apply to situations that matter today, to scenarios that really matter. And so we're going to look at what a Bill of Rights is, what the Bill of Rights is, a little statement about our rights, then we're going to dig into the first 5 freedoms. And then at the very end, it's going to say, check yourself. Do you understand a couple important terms? And then finally, do you have any questions about the Bill of Rights, especially the First Amendment? And do you have any First Amendment scenarios, any what-ifs? Because that's why the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights are so much fun. You know, we could say, well, what if, the judicial branch did this or this? And that's not kind of exciting. But when we get into, can I get in trouble for swearing in the parking lot of Best Buy? That's good stuff, right? Here's your post for your first assignment with the Bill of Rights about the First Amendment. You're going to be taking a look at the freedoms of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. So after you're done watching the video, or while you're watching the video, of course, which will be right here, if you come up with any scenarios of those first 5 freedoms, click on your section and then just post one of those scenarios or questions on this bulletin board. All you got to do is click the sticky, and you can type on it, and then make sure you put your little name on it too. Okay? My example is, can a person marry more than one spouse if it's part of his or her religion? That was an actual Supreme Court case. Anything that deals with your freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition, post it on there, and we'll see if we can answer those questions. Or, even better, we'll see if you can utilize your judgment in order to figure out if that's constitutional or not, because that's what I want you to be able to do. Apply this information to the Constitution. Are we ready to go? To start off with, we need to know that a Bill of Rights is a listing of the rights and liberties of people. There was an English Bill of Rights that took place, that was created in the 16, 17, and 1800s that really influenced the framers of the Constitution. Most of the states had Bill of Rights after the independence. We know that from the Federalist, Anti-Federalist argument. Some of the territories in the Northwest Ordinance, their rights were protected, so they had a Bill of Rights. That's with a little b and a little r. All right, a Bill of Rights. But the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. I do want you to make sure that you understand that our rights, in my mind, are not given by the Bill of Rights. Okay? They are protected by the Bill of Rights. We listed those amendments in order to make sure that the government doesn't take away the rights that we're supposed to have. It's that whole social contract where the government is there to protect our rights, and of course we give the government its power, but also we are following a lot of the laws. That's the give and take, right, of the social contract. It's also important to understand that our rights need to be balanced, okay? We've got our individual rights. That's my individual rights. That's you as an individual, your right to your freedoms and liberties. But then also there are the rights of everybody else. Those are the community rights. And we've got to make sure that this scale balances. And sometimes it will balance in the side of the community. Sometimes it will balance in the sides of the individual rights. But who determines how it balances? That is up to our judicial branch. That is part of the secure the blessings of liberty that we have in our preamble. The judicial branch interprets the laws and makes sure that those laws follow the Constitution. And it's again why those justices in our federal court system, especially those Supreme Court justices, are so important. All right, so let's get going with these Bill of Rights. It's 45 words. That's all it is in the First Amendment. That's all we're talking about tonight. And these 45 words are crucial to us as a society. In fact, I would argue that these 45 words are what make America different and why a lot of people want to come to the United States. You don't have to write down the 45 words. They're already in your notes. You just want to take notes about them to try to jot down some ideas and maybe a little bit of terminology. All right? The First Amendment starts with Congress shall make no law. In 1789, when these were written, it applied only to Congress. It didn't apply to the president. It didn't apply to the judicial branch because they don't make laws. It also didn't apply to the states, to be honest with you. It only applied to Congress, the House and the Senate. So the Bill of Rights only originally applied to Congress. That changed a little later in the 1860s with the 14th Amendment and then through some Supreme Court decisions, which is called incorporation. So what I want you to know, this incorporation, is that the Bill of Rights does apply to the states. Now, sometimes the courts have ruled one way or another, but in general, your freedoms that are guaranteed and protected by the Bill of Rights cannot be taken away by any level of government. That also includes public schools. Now, there are some limitations in those, in how your rights can either be protected or limited, and we'll talk about those in class as well. The big thing I want you to remember is the Bill of Rights applies to the government, the national government, the state and local government, and any state and local government entities. It doesn't apply to your parents. Your parents can limit your freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, petition. They can look in your room without a search warrant. They might punish you in a way that you think is cruel and unusual, but it doesn't violate your Bill of Rights protections. That's only for the government. Second note, in our school, we're not a public school. We try to follow a lot of public school law, but your rights are limited more at our school because we're an independent school, not from the government. Now, the freedom of religion actually has two components to it. It's known as the first freedom. It is listed first, predominantly because the people that wrote the Bill of Rights, basically James Madison, really thought that it was important. Ironically, I think it was supposed to be the Third Amendment, but the two that didn't get passed, well, it moved up to the First Amendment. Okay, you got to realize that America's early settlers came from a variety of religious backgrounds, so they're going to want their freedom of religion. The first aspect of it is called the Establishment Clause. It says that Congress shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion. What that means is the government cannot establish a religion, or the government can't make or favor one religion over another, or can't favor one religion. Some people want it to be said that the government can't favor religion at all. Thomas Jefferson called it the separation of church and state, where the government, the state, and the church, religion, should be completely separate and there should be a wall between them. Some people want that wall made out of brick. There's nothing that can go through it. Some people want that wall to have doors. Some people want that wall to have screen windows that maybe religion and the government can cross over. In some cases, we do have religion in our government. Think about the money that you carry in your pocket, or if you do carry it in your pocket, bring it to me because I like money too. But it says, in God we trust. That's been seen to be okay. Congress can start with a prayer every year. That's been seen to be okay. But there are also other limits. You cannot have Christmas as a federally recognized national holiday. You can't have the city hall of your town hanging a sign that says God is great, or gods are great, or no God is great. The idea is that the government should be staying out of religion at all times. Again, there are some ways that the government and religion do kind of cross over. The government can accommodate religion at times. The government can allow religious symbols to be on government-issued gravestones, as we will see in Washington, D.C. at Arlington National Cemetery. But the big thing is that the government and religion should stay separate so that the government does not establish a religion or favor one religion over another. The second clause in the freedom of religion in the First Amendment is known as the Free Exercise Clause. What the Free Exercise Clause means is that the government cannot interfere with your free exercise of your religion, how you practice your religion, whether it comes to where you go to practice your religion, the activities that you do to practice your religion, the symbols that you wear, the words that you say. None of those should be prohibited. However, there are times when they look at the community rights and they look at the individual rights, and sometimes the community rights are going to interfere with a freedom of religion. An example would be that if your religion requires you to carry a dagger, a ceremonial dagger with you at all times, that's the Sikh religion. That dagger can be, the government can say that you can't take that dagger onto an airplane because of the community rights. That's one of the more famous cases about where somebody's free exercise was limited. But in general, you cannot have your exercise of your religion limited unless the government has a compelling interest. So the government does have a compelling interest not to have human sacrifice. So they're not going to allow a religion that allows human sacrifice, or animal sacrifice for that matter, right? We'll come up with some scenarios here, but start thinking, do you have any religion freedom of religion scenarios that you can post on your class's bulletin board? The second freedom is the freedom of speech. Some would argue it's the most important. All right, it's especially if it is political speech. There is no free society without a freedom of speech. And what the court has done is the court has evolved that freedom of speech to not just include the spoken word. Originally, the idea was that your freedom of speech, that spoken word, is the most important protected speech. But now the freedom of speech also has evolved into symbolic speech. For example, what you wear or symbols you carry or actions that you conduct. Your expression, your speech, especially if it's political speech, is protected by the First Amendment. Now, there are limits. Some limits to freedom of speech include obscenity, like bad words, potty talk. Hate speech, which has been defined by the government, usually which is connected to your ethnic religious background, your gender, or your sexual orientation. Fighting words, like trying to instigate a fight, might not be protected. Defamation, where you are saying something negative about somebody just to make them sound bad. If it's spoken, it's called slander. If it's written, it's called libel. And then your speech that would instigate illegal acts, like, hey, everybody, let's go and rob 17 banks. You could get in trouble for those things. Now, one thing I want you to realize is you can say anything you want, but it doesn't mean it's always protected. And the court will sometimes kind of move around in what they say is protected or not. For example, obscenity. What's obscene to one person is not obscene to another person. And what's obscene in one location, say Milwaukee, Wisconsin, might not be considered obscene in Las Vegas, Nevada, or New York City. Sometimes it depends on your local community. But those are some limits to your freedom of speech. And of course, you're limited to your freedom of speech in school. You do not check your constitutional rights at the schoolhouse door, especially if it's political speech. But because school is a place for learning, if speech disrupts the learning process, then those freedoms are going to be limited. And of course, there's obviously words you can't use in school, or you can use them, but you can get in trouble, or shirts that are not allowed at school. A dress code for school obviously is a limit to your speech. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's public school and of course private school as well. The government can also not abridge the freedom of the press. The press started out as the printed word. Thomas Jefferson said that without freedom of the press, there is no liberty. Now, that printed word has expanded when we think of the freedom of the press. Now we can think of the freedom of the press to include television and possibly movies, the radio, and now the internet. So we do have that freedom of the press. There is no, the government cannot necessarily censor something that's going to be printed. If they do censor something before it is printed or published, that is known as prior restraint. And except for a few cases like national security, that's not going to be allowed. However, that doesn't mean that they can't punish you for something after it's published. It's almost like the idea that if you want to say something and it's published and then something bad happens about it, well, maybe there can be a punishment for that. But they can't stop you from saying it or from publishing it in the first place. That's no prior restraint. This also applies to public schools. However, in public schools, it's a little more limited. For example, a school newspaper could be limited in what it can print, and so can school curriculum as well, because it's a learning environment. But again, we've got that freedom of press as well. The fourth freedom in the First Amendment is the right of the people peaceably to assemble. This is the idea that the citizens of the United States can get together to assemble, especially if it's a political assembly. And the Supreme Court has ruled that even if it's an unpopular idea, the people still have the right to peaceably assemble. So, if somebody wants to politically assemble for a political reason, like to support the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate for a local office, they're allowed to do that. Now, if it's a candidate that's say an American Socialist Party, which is the Nazi Party, the American Nazi Party, those people are allowed to do that too, even if it is an unpopular idea, as long as the idea isn't necessarily illegal. What the government can do in some ways is limit the time, place, and manner of an assembly. They can limit the time, it can't be in the middle of the night in a park or whatever. The place, even if it's a public park, they could say that there are certain hours that you can only be there. And also the manner. You can't necessarily use like explosives or a bullhorn at 3 a.m. or whatever. That's what's behind permits. If I wanted to assemble for a picnic at a local park, I might have to get a permit from the local government. That's quite possible. But that local government cannot limit the permit based on my message or my purpose for assembling, unless that purpose for assembling is illegal. So even if it's an unpopular reason to assemble, if it's not illegal, then I'm allowed to assemble. And finally, the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances is one of the oldest rights in like the entire legal world. It goes back to the Magna Carta in 1215, where the people petitioned the king to make sure that he was following the law. Think about it. It plays a huge role in American history. What's the most important petition for a redress of grievances? That would be the Declaration of Independence, right? The right of petition cannot be denied. We can ask our government to change things and to solve problems without being punished. That can't be limited. It's basically now it's almost like a formality that we're allowed to do this. So that right of petition is really, really important in a democracy, because it's one way that citizens express their voice. If you put all of the freedoms listed in the First Amendment into one big pile, religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition, we can call it all freedom of expression. We are allowed to express ourselves either with what we say or how we wear our hair or what songs we listen to or sing, the poetry that we like to recite, the novels that we write, the people that we want to associate with. We are allowed to be free in doing that. We are protected to do that. Now, a couple years ago in 2017, the Annenberg Public Policy Center, some good people that are in the Philly area, they did a big, huge, open-ended poll about what are the specific rights guaranteed by the First Amendment. 1/3 of the people that were interviewed could not name any of them. Almost half of them named freedom of speech, which is good. Not many knew right to petition, which is kind of sad. But I want you to make sure that you do not fall prey to this type of lunacy here. I want you to be able to answer all of them. So how are you going to remember them? It's not necessarily in order, but it's easier to remember this way. It's RAPS. Religion, Assembly, Press, Petition, Speech. RAPS. That's what I want you to remember. So now that you've got a little bit of background on that First Amendment, what do you think? Which one of these rights do you think is the most important? Which one is the least important to you? Can you think of any other scenarios that you want to ask questions about? In class on Wednesday and Thursday, it's all about the First Amendment. We're going to take a look at the freedom of religion, press, speech, petition, and assembly. It should be a good time, and hopefully you guys will get interested in this. So your next step is to head to your favorite website. Of course, you thought I was taking you to your favorite website, which would be YouTube, but no, instead it's American History Rules. What I want you to do next is I want you to post a couple scenarios, if you have them, on this. You can look at some of these websites if you're interested in learning more about the First Amendment. Talk to your parents about this stuff because it's so interesting. Okay, I'm biased. And then also, there's a little take of this First Amendment quiz, which is possible. I think it's still working. You can just go down here and just sort of test yourselves if you want to. That's just a little formative assessment. I've talked about that. But then finally, what's your most important freedom? Fill it in the form below. What is your number one? Is it religion, speech, press, assembly, or petition? And then give me a little reason why. It'll be interesting to see what the class feels is their most important of the 5 freedoms. All right, so hopefully this is interesting to you. Hopefully this is the kind of stuff that you realize that it matters. You can also try to look for an article about the First Amendment in the news within 2019 for your Constitution Today assignment. And we will be talking about this tomorrow. If you've got questions, ask them, ask them, ask them. All right, we'll get all First Amendment-y, Yeah, we'll just dive into the First Amendment in our next class. History rules.